So today we're going to be talking about public school choice and assignment, specifically in San Francisco. So first we're going to start off with a video that talks about the history of segregation in schools and how it's still around today.
There's been all these stories in the news that basically say that schools are actually getting more racially segregated.
The most recent data shows the average white student goes to a school that's more than 70% white.
A study ordered by Congress found the percentage of high-poverty schools with mostly black or Hispanic students has more than doubled since 2000.
So what's the real story here? Okay, first, a super quick history lesson. Hang with me. It's been more than 60 years since Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark Supreme Court decision that tossed out the argument that schools could be racially separate but still equal. It was pretty obvious that conditions in black schools were almost always much worse than in white ones. The court made a unanimous decision that black students were being denied a quality education and made school segregation policies illegal. Problem solved, right? Actually, not right away. A lot of white communities in the South fiercely resisted the new rules for years.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
It wasn't until about a decade later, when federal courts literally forced districts to desegregate, that things started to change. Southern schools really started to integrate in the 1970s and 80s because of new programs like cross-district busing that brought a mix of kids from different communities to the same schools. In 1968, more than 3/4 of all black students in the South attended hyper-segregated schools. 20 years later, that rate had dropped to less than 1/4 of all students. There are lots of historical studies showing that this change had an overwhelming positive impact on black student achievement, with pretty much no negative impacts for white students. But not everyone was happy with a more racially integrated school system. A new generation of conservative judges rejected the idea that the federal government should be in the business of forcing local schools to integrate. Districts throughout the South, and some in the North too, began to drop their controversial busing programs, which many community members had rebelled against for years. There were other factors too, including what's called white flight, when a large number of mostly white, middle-class communities moved from urban areas to the suburbs. The result? There's been a massive drop in the number of schools that have a balanced mix of students who are white and students who are black and Latino. According to a study by UCLA's Civil Rights Project, the number of hyper-segregated public schools across the country, those with pretty much no white students, has tripled. This resegregation trend has been the most dramatic in the South. But before you northern liberals get too high and mighty, you should know that segregation is actually worse in the North. In fact, the states with the highest rates of school segregation are almost all northern left-leaning ones, like New York, Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, and yes, even California. So in other words, forced segregation is still against the law. A school can't reject a student just because of the color of his skin. But without being aggressively pushed to integrate, many communities are still self-segregating. Some local activists see this as a natural change. It's not a racial thing, they argue. It's about parents from diverse backgrounds wanting the best for their kids. And that means going to a neighborhood school that they don't have to take a long bus ride to get to, and where they'll be with other kids from their community. It'd be one thing, they say, if a kid was prohibited from attending a school just because of the color of his skin. But those days are long gone. Now, they say, it's about choice. And the government shouldn't be in the business of making kids schlep across town just for the sake of diversity. Diversity advocates argue that what's going on here is a major step backwards in the fight for racial equality. For one, they say, diverse schools have a positive influence on all students, both white and minority. It makes students more comfortable with diversity, reduces prejudice and stereotypes, and better prepares them for success in the real world. And studies have repeatedly shown that segregated schools have a disproportionately negative impact for low-income Black and Latino students. These students are more likely to attend schools where the majority of their classmates are poor, and these schools generally have fewer resources, less experienced teachers, and lower rates of achievement. And all of that can have long-term effects, influencing everything from the chances of graduating from high school and going to college to getting a higher-paying job. So, what do you think? How diverse is your your school, and how has that affected your education?
Okay, so as you can see from the video, the issue of segregation in schools is more complicated than just like the legal matters because of segregated housing patterns and like other things. Schools are still ending up segregated. So it's been a goal of the SF United School District to maximize the amount of integration in schools. So in the 70s, first they tried to bus kids from different neighborhoods together, but parents hated this because their kids had to take these long bus rides to school. So they got rid of that, and then next they tried a combination of parental choice as well as racial quotas. But the race-based admissions were challenging in court, so they could ditch that system too. So then finally the current system was created, which is trying to balance the goal of parents' choice in integrated schools. Okay. So how the SFUSD lottery system works. So first, parents apply with a list of schools ranked like with their top choices. And then a computer program takes a school and it starts filling the open spots using these tiebreakers. The tiebreakers are basically like these circumstances that give kids a priority in the process. So the first tiebreaker is if the applicant already has a sibling that's enrolled in that school, they're given top priority. And then the second one, that one's just for like pre-K, so I didn't really focus on that. The next one is CTIP, which is Census Tract Integration Preference, I think. And so basically, that takes kids who live in areas of the city that have the lowest average test scores, and it gives them an opportunity to go to a school that gives them more opportunities. It's more funded because there's less places in their area. And then finally, it looks at attendance area, so if they live near the school, they're given preference. And then finally, it just randomly fills the other. And so then the system repeats this process with the rest of the schools. And so sometimes kids don't get a school that was on their list. And so when that happens, they're just given the closest school available to them. And so the system's often criticized for being complicated and overwhelming, because sometimes kids just don't have a choice and they just have to go to a school they don't want to. So why is it like this? So in most places around the country, school assignment is just based on if you live like in the attendance area, then you just go to that school. But because of the segregated housing patterns in SF, which you've learned about in other implementations like the redlining, you can't do that. So they made the current system trying to make schools as integrated as possible, but again, it's really hard to do. So some benefits of the current system, schools are more integrated, and like the video said, there's a lot of shown benefits from being in a diverse, integrated school. Another benefit is the CTIP, like I was talking about. It gives kids an opportunity to go to better schools when they don't live in an area that has a very well-funded school. And the lottery allows you to have like a lot of options. But a problem with it is if you don't get those options, there's not a lot you can do. You can apply to be on the wait list of another school, but if a spot doesn't open up, then you're just stuck going to the school you applied to. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about gentrification and how that affects public schools. So like common sense, you would think that like wealthier families coming into less privileged areas would improve public education because they would bring in more money and donate to school. But this is not the case because gentrifiers usually send their kids outside of the local system to like private schools or charter schools. Because obviously, as a parent, you'd want your kids to go to like the best school they can possibly go to. And the few exceptions are these schools called magnet schools, which are public schools that offer special programs such as like gifted and talented programs or like language programs. And so these schools bring in those kids, but a problem with it is that a lot of those funding goes towards those programs, so it still leaves underprivileged kids behind. And so here is a graph that you can see in the public school system. So 28% of the young people in San Francisco are white, but only 13% attend public school because of their parents sending them to private schools, and so this just adds to the problem of segregation in public schools. So, some solutions to the problem. It's unreasonable to expect parents to not send their kids to the best school they could possibly go to. So you can try and get them to send them to their local school, but you can't force them. So it's unreasonable to expect them to solve the problem. So one solution that I've researched is making more magnet schools. So adding more programs to these public schools that will entice parents to send these kids to their local system instead of outside of the system. And then try to attract a more diverse range of students and add special programs to make sure that a diverse range of students are coming into these programs. Thank you.
Questions? Do you know when a bunch of private schools started popping up in San Francisco?
I think they've been around for a while because, people always want to send their kids to the best possible school they can go to. So.
And I was also wondering if maybe, I don't know if anyone knows, if the private schools maybe our school have to give money to, I don't know, the government or the public school system so that it's not.
No. It's privately funded, so they don't need to give any money to the public schooling system.
I mean, it's interesting, if you think about the private schools in San Francisco, right? If you accept, Lick Wimberding, who's been here for 120 years, whatever. I mean, we're 14 years old. UHS is or Urban is 30 years old. UHS is a little older than that, just about the same. About 30 to 40, right? The schools that we Drew is again probably between 20, so around 20 something like that. A lot of the schools that were older, at least the ones that were in Richmond, were parochial schools, and those were more K through 8 type schools. Start to see and that kind of stuff. They're older. Yeah.
How did the teacher salaries differ between San Francisco public schools, the gifted programs Jake's talking about, and then private schools? Is it a
Great
huge
question.
difference?
I have no idea. That's something we can probably figure it out.
Because then that just repeats, if the teachers at the private school make the most money, then the best teachers would want to go to that school, and then the parents with the most money want to send their kids to that school.
Benefits.
Here's the salary schedule. The base pay
So is
for
that,
SFUSD is $53,000, which is less than our base pay.
The what?
That's less than our base pay.
Which one? 53,000? It's less than people here, right? Yeah.
And the top is 96,000.
Which is less than what we make here.
That's, yeah. Nationwide, it's not necessarily,
Yeah, in Massachusetts, you made more money in public school than you would make in private school. But you would make it up in terms of like class size and the number of students you would get. You paid less. So like when I started in Massachusetts, I was definitely paid less than equivalent public school. It sounds like now I make more here in San Francisco.
could you go back to that chart, the stacked bar chart?
Yeah. This one. Oh. Better. Okay.
That one I think is very telling. Although, so where did you make this, or did it come
No,
from?
I found it.
So here's a little information literacy moment. It would be nice if this two stacks weren't the same size, that it wasn't percent, because the whole point is that not everybody in the census estimates is going to public schools. Presumably the red there would be smaller on the right hand side if this was, instead of percentage, if it was just total number. Right? Because there can't be more Asian students going to public school than there are in the city. But the really striking thing is how many white students aren't going to public school. Right? And that's, I mean, it's really, yeah, it's really interesting to me that San Francisco, that thinks of itself as a liberal, diverse city, this is the thing that happened in the South with desegregation, was all kinds of white families just like created private schools and withdrew the kids from the public school system to maintain segregation, basically.
And isn't San Francisco like not relatively high ranked in terms of their public schools? But the housing here is so expensive and the property tax is so high, so there should be a good amount of funding for it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to look at what the per capita spending is in San Francisco versus some other places. But because of Prop 13,
Right.
the funding may be
It's
significant, but it's not nearly as high as it would have been.
Could have been,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I found it interesting when you were saying, because it seems so liberal that it's, more segregated than we think it is, but I think this just shows, like, despite the diversity that San Francisco has, it's still segregated, I guess. So it's more of the, like, contrast than
And let's not, sing too highly about, the amount of diversity that exists in the city is actually not as
not as, but.
high as that we like it to think it is.
No, yeah, but like, it's I think, it more surprising the contrast between the diversity in schools in contrast to the diversity of the city itself, rather than our comparisons seem interesting.
Cool.
Excellent. Work.
It was founded in 1908.
1908, Drew? I stand corrected.
It was newer than university.
I think it shrunk. I think it went downhill for a while, and then